You don't always have to get too sexy to get to know a girl.
Bottom-up processing occurs when the sense data alone determine perception without transformation in light of stored information. Inadvertently, touching a hot stove is a paradigm of bottom-up processing. Regardless of the context, regardless of one's knowledge of kitchen appliances, the nervous system would register heat and pain. Kant argued that the mind comes with certain standard equipment, the categories of thought. That is necessary if we are to perceive the world at all, but that allows us to perceive it only in certain ways. We can never see things as they really are, but only as our minds are prepared to see them. For example, we cannot help but perceive objects as embedded in space, related in time and linked causally. In addition to these very general and abstract categories that are part of every mind, Kant postulated another set of mental constructs, the schemata. For Kant, the potential to develop schemata is part of the standard mental equipment, but the schemata themselves are developed only through experience with the world. Cognitive psychologists adapted Kant's concept of the schema to explain how the mind organizes the mass of data constantly provided by the senses. Since the film viewer must routinely manage large amounts of information, the notion of the schema is one of cognitive psychology's most useful insights for the film theorist. Simply put, a schema is a pattern, an orderly configuration into which experience is sorted so that it might be better managed. Without recognizable patterns to guide us, a massive sensation would overwhelm us, and our perception and memory would be erratic and unreliable. Let me begin with a refinement of the concept of schema. We actually use three types of schemata as we sift through the data provided by our senses, looking for familiar structures. The simplest are prototype schemata, which we use to identify individual things like people we know, or members of a class like birds. Prototype schemata are fundamental to the recognition of images. Second, template schemata allows us to identify patterns, like the alphabetical pattern in a filing system, or the layout of the streets in a neighborhood, or common sequences of events, such as those involved in eating at a restaurant. Template schemata are powerful, allowing us to fill in missing pieces of patterns so that we do not have to attend to familiar objects and can direct our mental effort to more novel and complicated tasks. While finding a phone number, for example, we do not have to read every page in the phone book, but can skip most of them, focusing our effort on the area where the number is most likely to be. Template schemata are also fundamental to our experience of films. They allow us to predict and anticipate upcoming elements, and they help us remember earlier parts. Finally, we have procedural schemata, for skills or tasks we have mastered, such as riding a bicycle, or typing, or understanding discourse. All three types of schemata figure in the viewer's comprehension of the avant-garde film. Semantic. The reader's most fundamental goal is to make some appraisal of the text's overall meaning. Viewers integrate details into larger structures by matching these details to schemata, which provide a way of managing large groups of detail. For example, imagine a shot of a person sitting and reading a menu. These details fit into schema for eating in a restaurant, and later in the film, a coherent restaurant scene will be both more memorable and more useful in making sense of the story than a collection of isolated details would be. Surface detail tends to be lost. Surface details, such as the exact wording of a sentence or the exact configuration of colors and shapes in an image, are actually all the reader or viewer has direct contact with. But once surface detail is organized and integrated into coherent, meaningful units, say an image of a character, those meaningful units are remembered and the surface details are lost. Do you remember the sentence Chris uttered at the beginning of the movie? Do you remember the shapes and the colors that were superimposed on your television screen? Well, do you? Generally, we have lots of template schemata for things like event sequences, whereas we have relatively few template schemata for patterns of surface detail. Sometimes, comprehension requires us to fill in material that is not explicitly given. Imagine our restaurant scene again. This time, after we see our character reading the menu, we see him paying the bill. We do not actually see him eating. If we know the restaurant schema, we can flesh out this scene and understand that he has eaten, even though the eating is not explicitly shown. We can call this kind of comprehension top-down or hypothesis-driven because our knowledge about the world leads us to fill in missing information. Schematic structure. Our task is now to throw into relief the difference between it and the comprehension of the avant-garde film. For example, the overall meaning of The Wizard of Oz might be paraphrased thus: though exotic places and people seem appealing, ultimately they are not as important as one's family. Or to quote the film itself,
"There's no place like home."
But film viewers do more than just identify the overall theme. They also try to identify the film's structure. The structure of The Wizard of Oz, put somewhat sketchily, is a narrative about a girl's dream.